Jacqueline Kent will be with us in a moment. Welcome, Lily. Welcome, Vivienne.
Welcome,
Gwen. Lovely to have you all here. So I will just do a quick introduction while we wait for Jacqueline to get her camera working at her end. Anyway. Jacqueline Kent is a Sydney-born writer of biography, social history and young adult fiction. A Certain Style, her biography of book editor Beatrice Davis, won the 2002 National Biography Award, and Beyond Words, A Year with Kenneth Cook was shortlisted for the same award in 2020. She has also written the only published biography of former PM Julia Gillard, who most of us know was the Prime Minister who delivered the federal government apology for forced adoption practices in 2012. This panel session is featuring mothers who have written a memoir of their experience of forced adoption. And as many of you know, we have Lily Arthur, who is a mother who lost her firstborn to illegal adoption practices in Queensland in 1967. She is a wife to Des Arthur and a mother to Amanda and her son, Tim. She has 10 grandchildren, 6 from her daughter and 4 from her son. Lily is the CEO of Origins, Supporting People Separated by Adoption Incorporated Australia, a charitable DGR organisation formed in 1995. Lily is the author of the book Dirty Laundry, The Crimes a Country Tried to Hide. Dirty Laundry takes the reader to a precedent court case in Queensland and onto a Senate inquiry that led to a national apology, giving a voice to many thousands of others across the world who have followed the lead of Australian mothers demanding justice. So welcome, Lily.
Thank you, Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Lily. We have Gwen Wilson. In the course of escaping her short-lived marriage, Gwen Wilson lost custody of her son. Authorities stepped in around his 2nd birthday, and Gwen, can people please mute themselves? Sorry, thank you. We're getting some background noise. Hang on, I can see Jacqueline. Let's see if we get her on the screen.
Hello, I've got you. Right. Okay. I can see. I cannot. They're not letting.
We've just had Jacqueline enter, but I can't see her. Sorry, I was introducing Gwen. Authorities stepped in around his 2nd birthday, and Gwen, herself only just 18, and in the absence of family, church and welfare support, was persuaded that adoption was the best thing for her child's future. She signed adoption papers in 1974 in the dying days of the forced adoption era. Yep. She never had another child. I belong to no one is her story. Yep. And we also have Vivienne Timmermans, who is a mother and the author of You Named Me Cherie. Vivienne shares the story of her daughter's adoption and reconnection. She also runs a support group for mothers called You Gave Me a Voice, which advocates for women who lost their children to adoption. So welcome all. Jacqueline, we still don't have you on camera, but I can see that you're here. Yep. So I'll hand over to you. I'm very sorry about the technical issues, not sure what's happening there, but let's proceed. Thank you.
All there, all 3 of you?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, good. I can't see you all. I did a minute ago, but never mind. We'll go ahead. Okay. Well, there we go. I must say it is really interesting to see you and to talk to you all, and having read your books and seeing what you've all been through. But what I want to ask you about today is, it's having gone through what you went through is awful enough, but actually writing a memoir about it is, as I'm sure you've realised, something else again. And I was just thinking about what happens when you do write a memoir. And what happens when you write a memoir is that an experience that might have taken years and God knows how long to happen has got to be, if you're writing about it, it's like having the whole thing in sort of me brought together at warp speed, because you're having to go through all the experiences again, having done it once. And the thing about these things is that it brings back so much of what happened and how it felt. And I'm a firm believer in the view that nothing is ever, you never get over anything. It's all there. It's all in you. And it means that there are certain things that bring certain feelings to the fore. So what I want to ask you, first of all, while I do believe that everybody should write a memoir for the sake of history and for the sake of bearing witness to who we are, I just wanted to ask you, first of all, which is, I guess, the obvious question, which is, in turn, if you could explain to me why you decided to write about what you've been through. So could I start with you, Lily?
Oh, okay. I started writing my book about 30 plus years ago, and it was more or less just going to be a short story about, how I lost my son. But, when I got to different parts of the life that I was living, I was a married woman in my first marriage. I sort of like based each trauma, I suppose, or event of my life into a chapter. And I just couldn't go on sometimes. It took me years to write the next one and then the next one, so the book's been going that long. But I thought I had to write it, and it was only intended for a few people. It wasn't intended to be some sort of book that was going to air everything to all and sundry all over the place. Mm. But the story just kept growing and growing, like there was no beginning. Oh, there was a beginning, there was a middle, but there was no end to it. So I just have to keep going over it, over all these years. So finally it did come out in the end.
Yeah, but that's fair about determination to keep going, though, was, if, as you say, that was really difficult. What about you, Vivienne? Did you have the same kind of determination to tell your story?
Yes, I did. The reason for myself writing this story was I found it really difficult because we were in silence, and I was trying to do research and trying to read other people's books, and all the books that I could read and get hold of back then were American or UK, and I really wanted to connect with something Australian. So I thought if I just, write something, just coming, because I'm not literal by any means, but I just wanted it to, a story that just came from me that somebody else might actually connect with, and they could reach out or just know that they're not alone. So, because I did feel like I was alone, because we were told to, be silent and all the rest of it that comes with it. So that was my motivation of writing my little story.
That's something that comes through all three of your books, by the way, the feeling that you were alone, and that, excuse me, did you ever feel, and I'll ask you, Gwen, did you ever feel, did the others feel that you were just sort of writing into a void? I mean, that you didn't know who was going to read this, you didn't know, did you ever get days when you thought, oh, do I really want to keep going with this, and is anybody going to be interested? Did you ever feel like that? Because I think you do when you're writing this sort of. Yeah. What about you, Gwen? Did you feel that?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I didn't set out to write about adoption. Strange as that may seem, I started writing just after my 50th birthday, and because I had a rather formal sit-down gathering, and I realised when I got up to give a speech that at each table, it was like my life story was mapped out in front of me according to who the guests that were at that table. And I kind of had a sort of a spiritual feeling, because I'd been supported a lot by other people in my young days. And because my mother suffered very badly from mental illness. She turns out she was a diagnosed schizophrenic, and I didn't have a father. And So I set out to write a tribute to those people who stepped in. Of course, it's bizarre that I could have ever imagined that it wasn't always a story about adoption, but I set out as if it was the tapestry of my life. Insofar as did I ever expect an audience? No. I showed it to my cousin when I thought I was finished, and he said, "Oh, good, good." He said, "This is your source material, is it?" I was like, "Source material?"
Yeah.
But the idea that it would ever get published, and it would get published by somebody like Hachette, was, never in my thinking.
Yes, it's as I said, you all three of you really in your book, it's very clear that, like, you really felt that, it was just you writing against the world in a way, really. But did you, and you've just said, Gwen, that that you didn't really think of it as being about adoption. And in fact, in all your books, all three of them, a whole lot of other stuff has come up about your family, and I guess that's inevitable when you start. But I'd just like to ask you, did you expect that to happen when you started writing? What about, did you, Lily? Did you think it was that, it would be, there would be so many other people in your story and who they would be?
Well, the thing that I started off as a story to let my son know what happened to us if and when I ever found him, because I started before the reunion. But, as I went along, I got carried along, like with the activism part of things. And, it sort of, the book went halfway through my personal life, and then it started into the movement of women like myself, that lost children, and the cause, going towards these parliamentary inquiries and the Senate inquiry, and then it sort of went from me being a nice ordinary person to being a raving person. Yeah. I don't know how Judge Byrne described me as, being seriously, focused on, let's put it kindly, into the baby stealing racket that he called adoption, and I was swept along by a lot of women, that were part and parcel of Origin. So in the end, I was forced to document their journey as well as my own. So the story, wasn't about me anymore. It was about, the movement and what was going on, and, the courage of the women that's, that were there, supporting us. And then through that devastating court case, and I had to recover from that, that nearly killed me. And looking back 10 years after all of that, what had been achieved out of it all. And I did take an awful lot of people with me.
Yeah. And that's another question I wanted to ask you all about the role of officialdom, because all three of you, when you once you got, you put your toe in the water of officialdom, of bureaucracy and all the rest of it, things just, once you start doing that, and you in particular know this, Gwen, it just grinds on, doesn't it? Did you feel at any point that you were going to give up and walk away on all that?
Oh, many times. Yeah. I would have loved to have just lived a normal life. When I first started this, I was a bride. I just got married. And then I thought, oh, well, I'll go and have a look at this. And then it grabbed me by the throat, and I didn't have any choice. I was stuck with it. I've been doing it for the last 20, 25, 26 years.
Well, you all have, haven't you? You've all been doing work with about mothers and adopted people. And it seems to me, and I don't know whether this is true, but there's a certain amount of frustration and rage in all of your books about what you had to do to get through the sorts of things that you really had to get through. How hard was that? Am I right about that? Yes, I can see you nodding. Yes, it's yeah. And why do you?
Although I did read Lily's book, and you know, she has every reason to be outraged.
Oh,
There's a line in my book where I say, looking back as an adult and realizing how I was gently persuaded to sign adoption papers when in fact it was coercion, and it certainly wasn't informed consent. For me, the overwhelming feeling is sadness, a deep, deep well of sadness.
Yeah.
The only real outrage I felt was when I did receive the report that the social worker had submitted to the Supreme Court to support the application, and it's just a pack of lies, and it puts me in such a bad position, and my ex-husband made to look like a saint. That's a slow burning fire that I don't think I'll ever lose. And I realize in hindsight that woman heard me speak many times at information meetings and never revealed herself to me. And my story was so unusual in that I had my son for 2 years. She had to know who I was, and she never revealed herself to me. That's a slow burning rage. But the rest for me is just so sad.
Vivienne, you're nodding. Was it the same for you as well? Yes.
Yeah, 100%. I can relate to Gwen in that way. Look, the adopted people were saying earlier that there's a sense of what is it? Like I want to come from a non-victim perspective, because they just, when I look back, like after I've written my journey, and now from what I've learned, and I look back, there is that passive persuasion, and the paperwork that I signed that I didn't sign,
yeah,
and the lies and everything that go with it, and that does make you. I've gone past the angry too, and it's sad. It is really sad, and that's how I can just move on from that. And if I can help people who are trying to navigate their way through that now, then I've got to be grateful to be able to do that in a positive way.
Yeah,
and help them not get stuck.
That's really good. But just hang on, I just want to ask another question or two on that point about beating the system, because you were all you were so young and scared when all these things happened to you. But you're saying how important it is not to feel that you're a victim. But the problem is, of course, that the system makes you a victim, doesn't it? So how do you get over that? I mean, does it take you, did you ever consider that you were victims? Vivienne, yeah. And how did you?
100%. I even went to, because I mentioned that I go through alcohol and drug abuse and that sort of thing. But then you get to a point where I had to really make a conscious decision to do something about that. Otherwise I would die. I even tried to commit suicide, and that's not where I wanted to be, because in my mind I kept thinking, okay, this happened to me, so I've got to turn it into something good. So I've got to be able to help people from what we've gone through. And like I'm only like I call myself the last generation, because I lost my baby in 1980. So these beautiful women, well, Lily in particular, her journey was so much worse than mine. However, mine wasn't easy either.
No.
So it's just nice to be able to have a voice for people who still don't have a voice. And so that's what's important for me.
Yes, and I can see that. The interesting thing about all three of your books is that none of you, there's no self-pity in any of them, which I think is extraordinary and shows a great deal of strength. And I was also going to ask it, maybe that some of that comes with time, maybe because these things happened some time ago. I was going to ask you, why did you decide you wanted to write your books now? Gwen, why did you decide that now-ish?
Well, now-ish, yeah. So I started in June or July 2005, and it hit the bookshelves on the 30th of June 2015. So I tell people it took me 30 years, 20 years to live it and 10 years to write it.
Is to write it.
Yeah. So the now was that birthday party. As I said, I didn't set out to write about adoption, which is ridiculous because it was always going to be about that. But it was honestly that feeling that those strong women who'd stepped in when I was a vulnerable child. My mother's first hospitalisation was just after my 7th birthday. And sometimes those hospitalisations were 3 months at a time. And I didn't have a dad. So it was really about acknowledging the resilience, fortitude, acceptance that those women instilled in me. That was my beginning. Unfortunately, once, there was 12 drafts before it even went to the publisher's editor, and then, 20 drafts maybe. Unfortunately, they had to take a back seat to the greater story. And it's in 2 parts. The first part I call Motherless Child, which is me. And then the second part I call Childless Mother, because I was a mother, but I didn't have a child anymore. So that was the reason for me. It wasn't this burning reason to tell my story, because I'd already, after the laws changed in New South Wales in April 1991, I'd already been addressing adoption information meetings, because, there was so much hysteria around we mothers were going to come and grasp our children back and all that sort of thing, So I was very used to telling my story. In fact, at one point I said, I have to stop doing this because it's losing its emotionality. It's starting to sound like, just a stream of facts.
Can I also add too, my motivation was to help lift the shame, because I got to a point where, because there was silence for me for 18 years because my daughter found me.
Yep.
I would never have looked for her. She looked for me. And then I thought, you know what? I am not going to be subject to silence anymore, and I do not want to carry this shame anymore. So I was driven to write my little story so I could help lift the shame for somebody.
Yes.
Yeah. Just, if I can help one person, then our job's done.
Yeah. What did you started writing?
Pardon?
Oh, I'm trying to hang on. Just trying to get on to Lily. Do you agree with that? What motivated you to write your book when you did?
Well, as I said, it started off a long time ago. But what motivated me was, I think, when we were approaching the 10th anniversary of the apology, and looking back over those 10 years and the way that we've been treated since then. And that's sort of like, I thought, well, this is, what I expected anyway, because we'd been involved with the stolen generation and the forgotten Australians.
Dispute that came in there, actually. Yeah, because you...
Anyway, it had been a burning thing on my mind about the judgment in my court case. And, how this judge dismissed my case, and more or less, and I was a ward of the state, mind you, the state was my guardian, dismissed my case, and the disparaging things, nearly defamatory, like about my family, my father, completely rewrote my story, and, labelled me as some sort of, I suppose, nutcase that thought that there was a baby stealing racket going on. Well, after, a Senate inquiry and a national apology, that judgment is still up there on the law site as a precedent court case. So, you know, I've more or less, you know, that spurred me on. It was the outrage that, you know, that when you've been abused by your guardian, the state of Queensland in my case, that you were not entitled to go back and hold them accountable and to deliver a judgment that was very scathing. I nearly killed myself when I got home after being in court. And the thing at the end of the day was, you know, like that was 18 years ago. And it still has such a dynamic effect on my mind, you know, like that this person who was supposed to be upholding the law, in fact, dismissed one of the greatest human rights crimes that have ever been committed in this country. And the thing at the end of the day is, and this is what we have, this is what we've either just put to one side or people have ignored or anything else like that. But what happened to women like myself was one of the greatest human rights crimes to happen in this country. And the thing at the end of the day is no one's been accountable. And you know, when you think about it, and I didn't only lose a child, I didn't only lose my only son that carried my name. You know, my name is extinct now, you know, like as far as my children are concerned. But I lost my grandchildren. I've lost my great-grandchildren. I've lost every other generation of my family because of the crimes that they committed against me. And at the end of the day, if we don't get angry about that, how dare they? How dare these people steal away our past and our future? You know, and we don't have a right to get angry about that. You know, and that's what drives me on. And I think about that crime gets carried on into perpetuity. It doesn't go away. My child and my grandchildren and every other generation, and, you know, like I've got a heritage, I've got a culture, just like any other person. And no one had any right to take that off me and my, you know, and my family. And I think that gave me the motivation when it all hit home. And I thought, no, I'm not going to stay silent about this, and I'm going to do my best to make people accountable for it. And at the end of the day, you know, like that judgment is still there. And in one sense, you know, you think to yourself, well, it harms me. It disparages my story, you know, disgraces my father and my mother, and you know, makes my son's father look like some sort of low-life deadbeat, makes me look like some sort of psycho that imagined that somebody stole my baby. You know, I have to tell my story. And, you know, and I want that, you know, it's there now. I don't have to do any more about it. So, you know.
Yeah.
I'd like to do something about having a normal life. That would be a change.
Yeah. So do you feel that was something you had to do before you could all move on, all of you? Yes. Right. Yeah.
I don't know that we actually move on.
Yeah.
I don't know that we actually move on. I think, you know, maybe some of the emotion gets tempered a bit.
That's right. I think that's right. Yes, you're quite right. You're absolutely right about that too, of course, because as I said, it's everything's always there, and some it comes up at certain times and not and other times. Did you have any particular way you just wanted, all three of you set down what happened to you very, very clearly and very succinctly and very precisely? Was it hard? Was the actual writing difficult? I mean, I know some of you took a long time to do it. When you finally got to it, was it really hard to write? Yeah. Vivienne, yes?
Yeah, for me, it particularly was because if you've read my book, I actually fell pregnant without having sex. So, and it's been interesting the amount of people who have reached out to me and said that's happened to me too. And there's actually journals on it and there's papers on it. So for me, that validated my truth. But what upsets me is I was 16 and I knew who the father was. And there was such a thing as carnal knowledge back then, but nothing was done about it. It was left up to me to make, you know, decisions and things like that. So, yes.
So it was hard. Which was the hardest?
It was very hard. Yeah. Just going into detail because, look, I was Australian champion roller skater
Yeah.
And I won the Australian Championships 7.5 months pregnant. So I just needed to explain the who and the why. And people had suspicions and no one even asked me if I needed help. I mean, my mother didn't even know. So she only had 2 weeks notice. But it was important for me. The detail was important for me because it was my truth.
Yes.
And I needed to share my truth.
Yes. And Gwen, did you feel that, because you usually
well,
ever to write, which was the hardest bit to actually write?
Say that again. I missed that. What was the first part?
When you were actually doing the writing, which was the hard bit for you to write?
Hardest, yeah. So when I said I knew nothing really about writing.
Yeah.
Apart from what I'd done in high school.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I moved cargo for a living. I didn't come from any kind of journalistic background. So I was capturing all those memories. And in fact, the brother, capturing everything. The early drafts had quite a lot of humour in them. So you're a writer, Jacqueline. The creation stage was like I was outside.
Yeah. Yeah, you're breaking up. I can hardly hear
myself, although there's a passage that I. Okay.
You could say, well, I can get in. Or, she's waiting. She's been trying all morning. No, it's got something to do with my.
I don't know if I'm.
Is that all right? I can't hear you.
Okay, we ready to go on?
Yeah.
Okay. So I found as I was writing, the more I wrote, the more I remembered and the more I was, back in those places. But I'd already had that experience when I'd tried to write my child a letter in the days before the adoption records were opened. There was a thing called the contact register. So I'd already written a letter and left that on the contact register. That was harder, that letter, because suddenly I was right back there. I lost contact with time and space where I was really in. So when I came to do the book itself, that part wasn't so hard, except there was one passage like Hemingway I wrote drunk and edited sober. But when you get to the editing, you're not creating anymore. Then you're seeing what you've got on the page. And then the proofreading, when I put my reader's hat on, and obviously by this stage, I've learned a lot more about writing than I did at the beginning.
Yeah.
So when I read it as a reader, not as a writer, that was hard. When I saw the
experience, isn't it? It really is. Yeah. When you read as a reader.
And when I saw the cover, I had an absolute meltdown when I saw the cover. And because there's a kind of a curtain, between the person you were, the young girl, young woman that you were, and those experiences, and then how you recovered your life afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like being on a stage when they close the curtain and you come out and you take your bows. But seeing that cover was like lifting that curtain, and that, very emotional woman in a huddle on the front cover, I just went into a hole. And the publisher had sent it to me for my approval. 24 hours later, my rational head came in and I'm going, oh no, this is wrong and that color's wrong. And you're trying to grab back control of the situation. And they were really like, yes, there, Gwen. So really, they were just sending me the cover as a piece of politeness. But that
sounds fairly standard, actually. I'm afraid. But,
and there is a scene in there about a rape, and I naively was creating individual chapters, saving them individually, and I lost that chapter. And forever, I couldn't find it anywhere on the laptop. And I thought, oh, I can never write this again. It took so much out of me to write that. But in the end, I did have to, because it wouldn't have made any sense if that chapter wasn't in there.
No. And what about you, Lily? Did you feel that when you were writing that you were sort of, when you finally got to the stage of reading what you'd written, did you feel it was a completely different experience? Did you recognise the person you were reading about?
That's a good question. Look, I suppose I got to the point where, you know, I'd lived the story and read the story, and I don't know how many times reread it, and I thought it was great when, you know, the book come out, and I thought, well, that's the job done now, you know. But I must admit, the whole experience, even though it was over a long period of time, like each chapter for me was very traumatic. Not so much the earlier ones, you know, when I was a child, but the later ones after I lost my son, and, you know, having to go back, and because, you know, I left my husband, and then I went back to him, and then, you know, faced the shame of, you know, like having to tell him that I'd lost a child before, and, you know, and I married a man that was sterile. He couldn't have children. So, you know, I couldn't live with the thought of not being able to have another child. So I ran off, and then go back pregnant, and then having the whole neighbourhood knowing, you know, like, here comes that immoral woman, you know, back, you know, with her tail between her legs, and everybody in the neighbourhood knowing that, you know, this wasn't my husband's child, and just the shame of paying penance back to people that accepted me, and being, you know, more or less a slave to people, just for that that guilt of having run off and brought back, you know, another man's child, and you know, the whole burden of, you know, how society saw people like me, and you know, and then it was only when I joined Origins and found out all the crimes that they committed against me, I lost all that. There was no guilt, no shame, no nothing anymore. You know, like, no one could convince me that I was that person that they were judging.
Yeah.
And that was it. You know, like, I put the blame and the shame back on the people that did all those, you know, abuses against me.
Yep.
So, I mean, when I got to the end of the book, I thought, well, that's me. You know, like, I've said my piece, but then I find that maybe I haven't fully said my piece. Maybe there might be another book there somewhere, you know, like about the treatment that we've been given, even after a national apology. You know, we still are treated like secondhand goods, in my opinion. You know, and there's, so far, you know, very few of us, if any, have had any justice, and we certainly haven't got our baby back.
No.
So, you know, maybe there's another book somewhere. I don't know. Maybe the story's never going to be finished.
Maybe you should all get together and write it, because, you know, that, but that's actually, but that, what you said about not taking in the shame, that is something that we're kind of primed to do that. We're kind of often primed to think that it is our fault, you know, that we've done bad things and we are to blame. I think one of the things that comes through all three of your books is that you don't do that. And if you're being absolutely honest about what happened, you can't make excuses for yourself, and you can't make excuses for anything else. You just have to tell it in the phrase like it is, which brings me to another question which I'd like to ask you all, and that is the question of the reaction of people close to you when you first of all told them that you were writing these books, and secondly, if you showed them what you were saying. So let's do the first bit first. Vivienne, what sort of reaction did you get when you explained that this was going to happen?
Okay, so my husband and I almost had a divorce when my daughter actually contacted me, because he didn't know or couldn't remember that I told him that I had her.
Yeah, right.
So when we'd gotten through that, and then I said, look, I really want to write a story because I really think that I didn't write it to be a bestseller. I just wrote it as for other mums to read. And he thought it was a wonderful idea. He hasn't read it. My daughter was actually my proofreader.
Why hasn't
my second born, that is. And my adopted daughter. They proofread it for me and actually added to it as well, which was, a blessing. But my mother has never read it either.
Why not? Why not? Is it just too painful for them, or are they embarrassed? Why do you think they haven't?
Because the truth hurts. And and because I was silenced, wasn't allowed to tell anyone that I brought her shame on her family, and who, God forbid, who would read it. People are going to know.
Oh, right. Yeah.
The whole. It was more about her shame that I didn't carry anymore.
And
still to this day, she's never read it.
It's not about you. It was sort of all about
correct
things. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Lily, what about you? Did you show your work to anybody before you published it?
No, I didn't particularly care what they thought, to be honest.
No.
It was my story and I wanted to tell it. So, I mean, there are people, and particularly, my first family, probably wouldn't have liked the fact that, I spoke about my first marriage, which was very painful and abusive. Yeah. And, some people, even though they've seen what was going on in your life, they didn't say anything. And they don't like the fact that, that your abuse has been exposed publicly. But, that's not my cross to bear. But as far as anyone else is concerned, the book was about me having my say, because I was silent for so long. And, how people take it, it's up to them. But, it's been my journey like everybody else's journey, and no one stepped into my shoes. So, I'm just glad it's out there. I don't think about it much, to be honest. It was a job that I had to do, and I did it. And,
oh, good. And when I was going to ask you, because you're the of the three of you, you're the one who went the commercial publishing route. What was that like? What sort of reaction did you get from the publishers when you were the manuscript?
Rejections.
I mean,
so it had been through so many iterations, as I've mentioned, and I had shown it to other people. As I said before, I'd shown it to a cousin because earlier versions were really more like a family history. And also, just to check, because I was so young in some of these passages, and yet I had such vivid memories. So, a little bit of it was fact checking, let's say. I also showed it to some people where I live. So anyway, long story short, one of the women where I live had been the religious books editor for Hodder and Stoughton.
Okay.
And through her, she introduced me to a wonderful professional editor, and that editor got me to Publishable Standard. And through that, I got an agent, and then the agent pitched to publishers, and I got a lovely collection of rejections. I got one of the nicest rejections ever from not HarperCollins, that's the romance side, but no, Harlequin's the romance side. HarperCollins got the loveliest rejection, and then ultimately Hachette picked it up. But initially,
they never knew why they'd rejected it. I'm just getting to the kind.
Well, because if you're going to go with one of the top five, they have to be able
Yeah, you would have been told the sort of this does not quite fit into our program stuff, which is what they always say. But did you ever get a feeling for why did Hachette pick it up too? I mean, what was it that they saw that the others hadn't seen, basically?
There we go. I think I dropped out momentarily.
I think you did.
Yeah. Look, getting a publishing deal doesn't always have to do with the quality of the work or the writing. It has to do with how many copies they can sell.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Of course.
Which is what I've learnt.
Well, in fact, yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So
question of.
But look, initially people knew I was writing, but it was kind of like there, tut, you know, that's lovely, dear. You know, nobody ever expected that to see the light of day.
There, tut, poor you kind of feeling.
Not poor you. It was really more about, look, you've got no credentials as a writer. Why would you get published? And there were a few people, of course, I got obsessed with my topic. Well, I didn't get obsessed. It's just that the whole thing of adoption always lived in me. The loss of my child always lived in me. So, of course, when you're writing, it's coming up, and your conversations will revolve around discoveries or paperwork or research. And some people did roll their eyes and go, oh, the adoption thing again.
Oh, for goodness sake, yeah. People are funny, aren't they? They kind of, it's not rejection so much as embarrassment and discomfort, isn't it? You're making people.
Jacqueline, you know, there's still a whole cohort out there who thought our children were better off going to a nice family.
Oh, yes. True too. Yeah.
And until I met my current husband, I didn't know that adoptive parents could divorce.
Yeah.
So my current husband and his ex-wife actually adopted a child also. And after 13 years of marriage, they divorced. I was gobsmacked. I thought that they were I thought they'd been vetted to be the most perfect people in the world, and that we were all so immoral and unsuitable and Anyway, the other ladies might want to speak to this.
We've got about 5 minutes left, and I did want to ask you whether you think the system has changed for the better since you went through what you all went through. Do you think it's easier for young women now? And if so, why or why not? Do you think, for a start, that people are better informed and and so on and so forth? What do you think? What do you think, Lily? Because because you're still carrying the frustration and anger that you felt. Do you think it's better? Do you think it's better now or easier for young women now?
Look, when you look at the numbers of children that are in foster care, you think to yourself, well, what's going on here? Are these people getting enough education? Do they have any idea of the damage that, separation does to a child? We know from research, the amount of problems that adopted people had from their removal. But, there is education out there. There is support out there, and it really is a concern that so many children are being taken or being separated from their parents. And I think that's a big worry.
Yeah.
We're going to have another generation of like rootless children that, have been separated from family and culture and everything else like that. And we're going to have even more problems.
So would you agree with that, Gwen and Vivienne? What do you think about that? Do you think it's easier now? Do you think that we are more enlightened?
You go first, Vivienne.
But yes.
Look, I know that there's less and less adoptions as such in Australia each year as opposed to 50 years ago. It is the women have, like, they've got so much more support to keep their children, for the children who aren't caught up in the whole foster situation, because that's a whole other discussion really. I just look back at what we all went through and how we were treated and for what. Because look at these girls now. Look at how many single women there are raising families, how many blended families there are. And so my struggle is for what? Why did we have to go through that?
Yeah.
What was it all for, other than for religious reasons or societal? Well, so that's my struggle. So I believe that I believe families have a better chance of keeping their children now than they did, of course, 50 years ago.
Yeah, well, what I'm hearing from you, there's never a case of that was then, this is now. There are still people who feel the way that people felt then, and still a problem people have, and there are still fights that have to be made. And
what do you think, Gwen? Sorry.
Oh, well, to what Jacqueline's talking about, yes. Look, there are still women particularly of a certain generation who feel that we deserve to lose our children, absolutely, and that was the right thing. I have a bit of both sides of the other coin. Like you, Vivienne, I'm frustrated about why we had to go through that. But within my own family circle, none of the women who have children are either married or they weren't married at the time they had their children. We're all supportive. We're all happy to be grandmothers and great grandmothers and so on. On the other hand, my stepson does work in one of those out of home situations. He's just like a house minder. And, you know, these poor children who are, the youngest he's had is 11, and he's just a house minder. He's not a counsellor. He's just there to make sure that they can learn how to cook their breakfast or get to their appointments or fill out a Centrelink form. There's a whole, as Lily said, a whole nother drift of young people coming through. And of course, the rates of removal for Indigenous women.
Oh, yes.
And some of the behaviours, some of the situations that I see with single white women, you think, my goodness, if she was Indigenous, her child would be removed by now. So, you know, it goes on. I did just go to Hay Jail, and which at one stage was an incarceration for women who'd been in Parramatta Girls' Home. I sounded out two of the local women, and they said to me, oh, they were bad girls. They deserve to be in there. They used to behave like this and yell at us, and they'd scream.
So I'm afraid we're going to have to cut you off.
Why wouldn't they have been screaming out?
I'm going to wrap this up, but I just want to say thank you to all three of you, because you know, I think you're terrific women, and I'd love to meet you all properly, except by means of digital technology. And I think your books are great, and more power to you, and I'm very glad to have met you. Thank you very much, all three.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Vivienne, and thank you, Gwen. That was such an important discussion. And I think, there's still a lot of people who don't understand the forced adoption era and the experiences that you all went through. So thank you for sharing so openly about your journeys. And there is still much work to do, isn't there, in this space? There were some difficult things discussed, so I just want to make mention of the Lifeline number 131114 for anyone who may have felt some big emotions coming from listening to some of these experiences. So thank you very much all for sharing. We will finish up this session now, and for those of you who are continuing on, we will see you in the last session of the day in just a moment. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.